Hey everybody, welcome to Strategies for Preventing Moisture-Related Flooring Failures. My name's Joe Everly, and I'm here with our President and CEO, Lee Eliseian.
Greetings.
How you doing today, Lee?
Doing well.
Good.
Looks like you got a little studio audience here today, Joe.
Indeed, yeah. Most of the registrants are tuning in from their computer, but we had some people in the area that are here in the office viewing. It's great to have everybody here. So we are, like I said, going to talk about strategies for preventing moisture-related flooring failures, and let's get into it. So the agenda for the day, going to do a quick review of the root of the problem, also what the results can be and the cost behind those results. We'll talk about some practical issues that plague companies, and those will include scalable testing for all your locations, validity of test results, interpretation of those test results. And that's one of those things, Lee, that you're kind of really emphasizing, the interpretation. Is that right?
That really is, John. Yeah. Once you get in, ideally get information, how are you going to interpret that information to be able to use it effectively for making decisions?
Yep, makes sense. The issues, conflicts of interest, can arise as well. And then just the general financial impact of those issues. We'll talk about some of the solutions that IFTI has found to be pretty workable, and we'll talk about the ROI behind those solutions.
And this is great because on the solution and ROI side, it's actually coming from real-world experience with customers, input we got from customers.
Exactly, and so that'll be kind of the format for today. Is I'll go over some of the information, and Lee is going to provide a little bit of color and a little bit of the practical kind of real-world implications of some of these things. So after the presentation, we'll have a little Q&A. And if you're not able to stick around for the Q&A, or if you have any more kind of extensive technical or scientific questions, we would love to have those. Feel free to send them along. We can take those at info@ifti.com, or you can give us a call, 800-490-3657. And we'd love to chat. But anything else that comes up throughout the show, feel free to send along in the little question box. Next, going to talk about the root of the problem. And so, Lee, you ever done any gardening?
They don't let me get in the garden.
So,
but I have heard stories about it.
Any gardener will tell you that if you don't pull a weed out by the root, it's going to come right back. And that's kind of the thing that we see with moisture-related flooring issues, is that people aren't solving the problem at the root of the issue. So what is the root of that issue? Lee, what can you say about the lack of consistent and reliable test results?
Well, it plagues the industry. Lack of information, reliable information to make decisions is a problem in the industry. There are no standards as far as how that information is communicated. Because of that, you can, if you haven't standardized it yourself within your organization, you don't know what you're going to necessarily get. It's just the state of the industry. There are no ASTM issues around that have addressed this issue. I'll say it that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what that can lead to is, flooring failures, like we said, just outright failure. You're also going to have some trouble making appropriate product decisions. You're probably going to end up wasting a little bit of money in certain scenarios. And one specific scenario is that you're going to end up overpaying for mitigation products in a lot of cases.
You hear an awful lot about that.
That's interesting. So that's kind of what the root of the problem ends up kind of growing into. Now, as far as related concerns, you also got to worry about conflicts of interest and a lack of company-wide standards. And so what can you tell us about that, Lee?
Well, conflict of interest is another reality in our industry, and it's based on just the evolution of where we are in the industry, where the contract community is still driven by specifications that state that the contractor, flooring or general, is responsible for doing the testing. Mm-hmm. The industry has built a conflict of interest into the system based on that, where it's a little bit like we hear stories from our customers about, geez, if I'm having a contractor do the testing, and then I get a change order in because the values are not in compliance with what the standards are, I feel a little bit like when I buy a house, I have an inspector come out to do a home inspection and then find all these things and then gives me a quote to fix them all. And I'm wondering, how objective is that? And I'll say the flooring industry is where it's mostly problematic, where we don't see that in other parts of the construction industry. Roofing and what have you, they have made the division of who's doing the diagnostic and who is actually doing the testing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that's one of the things that we've been able to address with some of the people that we've helped is some of those deficiencies in the standards. So what we found is that a lot of retailers are missing something that is scalable, something that can give them consistent and unbiased results, and something that can be anywhere that they have stores and not delay their projects. Those are kind of the key points of what needs to happen. So
we hear that from the customers, is that is indeed what they're looking for.
So some of the familiar failures that you have probably seen, things like emulsified adhesive, just a little bit of adhesive and grime making its way up through the flooring, just high traffic areas showing wear and tear. And that can kind of start to lead to some other issues like bacteria and air quality. Is that right, Lee?
Well, that's true. With certain types of products, you don't just run into bond failure issues. You can run into indoor air quality issues. We see that in the area of carpet tile that happens to have the type of backing that is low permeable, will not let moisture pass through it very effectively. We'll run into issues like that, even though it doesn't manifest as a distress at the surface.
It makes a lot of sense. And so like we were saying, kind of on the other side of the coin, you're going to have your failures, but then you also have overuse of sealer products. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this photo is you look in the background here, these guys are prepping the concrete. There's a lot of merchandise back there, and it's definitely not getting sold while this is going on.
That becomes one of the factors when we look at the ROI, a factor of what are the potential lost sales that occur if there is a problem like this.
Yep. Yeah, and that's one of those things that we found sometimes people don't take into effect, the lost sales and management time.
What becomes a true cost is what we end up hearing from the customers, is that this is something that we need to consider.
Absolutely. And so what can go along with those familiar failures and overuse of sealers is some familiar headaches. And so if you are involved with the testing program in your company, then you may have seen some reports like this if you guys don't have any standardized practices in place.
Well, that's right, Joe. The issue with that is, again, there's no standards in the industry on how to do the reporting. Mm-hmm. And you can get very vague data, if you will, mm-hmm. and it can be problematic.
So it sounds like there's a little bit of a disconnect where there's standards for how testing is done, but no standards for how to report that data? Not
in a consistent fashion, I'll say it that way.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, I mean, test results like this, they can be hard to decipher. Oftentimes they're incomplete, and it's not always going to be easy to verify them down the road. And generally they end up just being a source of stress and can create a lot of liability for you. Again, just depending on what how the situation plays out.
True.
So one other familiar headache, as we discussed, there's going to be instances where you're also getting change orders for moisture mitigation products, and those are going to have a pretty big impact on both your budget and your schedule.
Unexpected change orders are very problematic, and we hear stories regularly about that happening. And it really is not the contracting community's fault that occurs. It is the way that the system is set up. Mm-hmm. If you're accountable or responsible to do a certain function, let's say install a floor, and within that specification it says you also are responsible for doing the testing and making sure it complies with what the manufacturers say it should, and it doesn't by 1 point, let's say, you're now at risk and you're out of compliance. So the typical, I would say, a knee-jerk approach is, okay, well, we're going to have to seal this floor. It's going to be $3, $4, $5 a foot to do that, and it ends up as an unexpected change order, which in fact becomes the conflict of interest. Now, not saying anything at the contracting community is doing anything really wrong. They're complying with the results, and they're also motivated, human nature, to lower their risk. By virtue of sealing a slab, they have lowered their installation risk of having a problem, certainly, but it is on the owner's dime.
Yep.
And that is a problem.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like, there are definitely going to be some instances where you need to seal, but it gets irresponsible if you're doing it too much.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily, Joe, go as far as saying irresponsible. If there's not a standardized methodology in place, it's almost like a default.
Okay.
Now, if there is a standardized methodology in place where you do understand what is the conditions, they have been established, and there's a decision-making process involved on how to interpret that information effectively, it opens up the field for being able to make more cost-effective decisions without increasing risk.
That makes a lot of sense. So one thing I kind of keep hearing you come back to is the interpretation of data. It's kind of turning it into information that you can use. Seems like that's a pretty valuable thing.
That is very significant.
Yeah.
Data alone doesn't provide what's needed. It has to be information that's structured in a way that can be used in decision making.
That makes a lot of sense. So what's the impact of these headaches?
Oh, there you go.
Hopefully you don't have to go to these guys. But it's not going to get any better when you get the bill for either, again, a failure or over mitigating your floors. So we'll revisit this in a little bit, but let's give a little illustration of the financial benefits. So I just want you to kind of do a little estimation for yourself and think to yourself, what is the cost of installing flooring at one of your locations? Just one location, pick your favorite one. Where do you think that might be? And then also think to yourself what the cost of that flooring failing might be. So on average, we found that it tends to be about 4 times the original installation cost. Of course, that'll vary a little bit.
Right, but it's not a bad place to start. We see this and hear this from our customers regularly, that's a fair number.
Yep. And again, just keep those numbers in mind. We'll revisit a little bit later on and just to talk about the ROI a little bit. So again, when you have a large number of locations, it kind of becomes just a law of large numbers thing. Statistically, a certain percentage of installations are bound to have some moisture issues. And it's just really not worth the risk of, not taking the steps to get a testing program in place and make sure that you are making appropriate product decisions.
Most of our customers look like this group up here at one point or another, and finally got sick and tired of having to deal with issues and decided to move forward. Because it's possible to address it effectively in today's world. There is a solution available. It just takes the effort to
a little bit of
look into
it.
Right.
Yeah. So one more quick illustration. We talked about the cost of installation and failure. Just kind of think to yourself, how many of your locations have required a seal or mitigation product before you put the flooring down? And that might be one that you need to verify internally or double check. You might not know off the top of your head. But if it's more than 20% of your locations, then it's pretty likely that a lot of those are unnecessary and that you're probably overpaying for those mitigation systems in some of your locations.
Joe, that's a very fair point. We see this time and time again working with our customers and getting input from them that this is the way it typically plays out. So we do use that as an indicator.
That's interesting. So again, like we said before, it's not the contracting community's fault. There's obviously going to be instances where sealing the slab is the answer. But again, like you said, the way the system is set up, it just takes a little bit of planning and making sure that you're not sealing unnecessarily, which it adds up over the course of a year.
If I may say that a number of our customers, prior to engaging with us, have communicated numbers of 50, 60, 70% of their facilities were in the queue to be sealed based on limited data. And it was a big frustration point. I think it was photograph number 2 there, or maybe it was number 1. They're pretty darn frustrated over what's going on there, right? And after adopting a program and getting control over it, see those percentage dramatically reduced.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. And so one of the things that really goes into that is making sure that you're familiar with the products that you're considering, what the costs and the warranty limits are. And what we found is that the information and the knowledge around those things is not always well researched, which is going to lead to money-wasting decisions that might have been avoidable with a testing program in place.
That's right. In today's world, the chemical companies that are producing building materials, if you will, specifically within the flooring or coatings industry, have come a long way. So there's more options available to us today to do intermediate approaches that are effective than it is to have to go to, which are very effective, sealing systems. They're very costly, very effective, but they're also overprescribed in our opinion. A more practical approach, and what we found the customers are looking for, is the balanced approach. I want to invest my dollars where they're needed, not where they're not needed, because there's never enough of those to go around.
Yep, it makes a lot of sense. So, again, just kind of having the information and knowledge around your products and around the decisions you're making is going to go a long way. So the next is kind of what are you supposed to do and how are you supposed to do it? Sure you're saying, well, there's a lot of problems, but what are the solutions here? And so, the short answer is you implement some kind of standardized testing program for all of your locations. It's just going to make your logistics a lot easier. It's going to bring down costs. And it's going to drastically increase the reliability of your results across all of your locations. And we found that, inconsistent, invalid results, you might as well not test at all. It's kind of a garbage in, garbage out thing there.
We've heard from a number of customers after implementing a standardized program that they actually feel that they finally have gotten their arms around this issue. They have some sense of control, and they're in the position to make informed decisions. So we hear that regularly.
So, kind of going on to how you do that. Well, like we kind of touched on earlier, the solution would need to be scalable. It's got to be reliable, consistent, and then it can't be getting in the way of your project schedule. And obviously, a great side benefit is if it's going to cut dollars from your budget, that's something that everybody's going to love, and it's going to make your supervisors pretty pleased if you're able to implement something that is saving tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of a year. So as far as IFTI solutions, let's kind of take a look at people that we've helped do just this, kind of what we've been talking about. So these are some of the folks that we've implemented yearly programs with. Probably some names that you recognize on there, and you'll notice there's a common thread. People with a large number of locations, need to have their locations open, and it needs to be coordinated, consistent, so that you're making consistent decisions across the board. Right.
Again, the standardized approach.
Exactly. So where can we help those people, or where do we help those people? Well, IFTI has done a pretty good job of covering the map.
Now, that was driven from what the customer's needs were.
Right. And so, like Lee was saying, we kind of found that the early customers that we were working with needed something that they could apply in a more widespread fashion. And so that's kind of what led us to grow out our network and kind of build out to where we are today.
We're covering North America. And a number of our customers will do rollouts where they need to get the information within a period of time, and the business was designed to address that need they have. So the model was built to be able to do simultaneous testing throughout North America in a consistent fashion, a standardized reporting model. So one after another can be reviewed and decisions can be made in a very effective fashion. Mm-hmm. And it was built for them.
Yeah. And so we kind of learned early on that in order to do that, to grow with what the customer's needs were, we needed to really have a solid process in place for producing these reports, how we were going to implement the tests, train our technicians, and how we were going to deliver reports to the customer. That's right. So can you talk a little bit about how that process evolved?
Well, yeah, over the last 17 years, we've been working on the business model to produce that result for the customer. And we have created a 6-step process to provide that capability. And it's being refined, get a lot of feedback and input from our customers as far as what their needs are and what is working. And when we identify something is not working, we'll go through and do an adjustment to the process. But again, with the idea that it produces a consistent outcome based on what the need is.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So as far as reporting data, what's the kind of best combination of things that we found to include are, of course, the results from the actual test data, detailed photos of the test site. You can kind of have a visual indication of what's actually going on.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Also, floor plans indicating the test sites. And kind of on a similar note, as far as visual indication, we give you mapping results for the entire slab.
This reporting model here, the mapping model, is given a visual depiction of the numerical test data representing over the slab. So that has become a kind of a favorite to our customers, is utilizing that as well as any other stakeholder in the process, like a manufacturer, to really understand what is the moisture condition of that slab and what it would be my risk of utilizing, let's say, my product. An ABC manufacturer could be looking at this and saying, okay, we have an outlier. We have one test data point that is outside of our limit, but I have enough information to assess the risk of using my product, and I'm comfortable enough to approve my product and provide a warranty to the owner because I have got enough information to do that.
Okay, so it seems like the comprehensive nature of the report helps combat kind of some outliers that you might find, or just one or two data points that might be off?
That is correct, and I'm glad you touched on that. The comprehensive report, again, has evolved over the years from input from customers and other stakeholders that are involved to just do that, provide the information, not just granular data, but information to make a decision.
Mm-hmm. And we've got a couple of questions coming in. I see one here from Troy C. Also a couple others, Andrew Hawkins as well. Just wanted to let you know we have those questions, guys, and we will definitely touch on those towards the end. So continuing with reporting data, with the last thing also, of course, to risk assessment chart and an executive summary to kind of sum everything up and give you a little bit of recommendation how you can use this information.
Yeah, that's correct. Risk assessment chart is a methodology of taking all the information and putting it in a system that will provide a risk level. And it is a good indicator, and it's a useful tool for the reviewers.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Well, so while we're here on the data page, let's before we move on, why don't we touch on Troy's question here? So Troy asks, how does testing help prevent floor moisture issues? It seems that this would be too late in the process. And it's a common attitude that we've heard, but the biggest thing is, like the Andy Griffith show would tell you got to nip it in the bud. You need to make sure you're implementing the testing program ahead of time, which in a lot of cases, what it's going to do is it's going to reduce your risk of failures. Now, if the failure has already occurred, we, of course, can come in and do some analysis and help out with that as well. But can you build on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. The majority of the value we provide the industry is in pre-testing. This is either a new facility that has a brand new slab, or a remodel that's occurring, or an acquisition of an existing facility. And we're testing to understand what the conditions are of that slab. In some cases, really early in the process. So decisions can be made, and a solution can be folded into the scope of work. So on the pre-testing side. Post-failure, it is just that. It becomes a forensic study. Trying to determine why the so-called crash occurred, and what can be done to resolve and mitigate.
Right. So one other thing I think that goes back to is, again, who's doing your testing? What are their parameters? How do you know they're doing it correctly? And is that testing verifiable? So if this failure has occurred and you are up against a warranty and you need to, try to get that covered, what can you do as far as, is it too late? So again, if your test results are not conclusive, not comprehensive, you may be out of luck in a lot of instances. So it's just another safety that testing beforehand provides.
Yeah, that's the concept of the pre-installation testing. That is right.
And so, Troy, I hope that was helpful for your question. We'd love to discuss further with you. So, feel free to either send out another one or shoot us an email offline, and we'll touch base with you on that further. So one of the things that we've also found has been really useful for our customers is kind of collaborating on these answers, these solutions. So our risk management system, you saw the reports that we give with that, but one of the biggest benefits is that you'll have access to that data, all those reports, all of our recommendations. That'll be online for every location you've ever tested. And so any member of your team will be able to review reports, put in any notes, and kind of stay on top of things. And you'll be able to access it from any web browser, including your smartphone. So, if you're out at the site and you need to check the report and you forgot your briefcase or whatever, it's no big deal. Anywhere you can get internet access, you can get your results and kind of get the information that you need.
So if I may, Joe, the collaborative approach through our risk management system is, again, it goes back to, I wish I could say we came up with an original idea. Once in a while that would be nice. But all of our ideas primarily is from our customers. This is what our needs are. What can we do? Well, we built the risk management system for them. And it provides, to the points that you're making, a way to house all of the information. But there's also a decision-making process that's part of the risk management, where a draft report is produced. The stakeholders all look at the report, look at the information, and then can make informed decisions that we can use, the standards materials that were specified, or we have to go up to more high-performance adhesives, up to sealers in some cases. But it's being thoroughly reviewed and vetted at that point, and collaboration occurs through the system, where there's communication back and forth through the note page. And it's then, once agreed upon, it's approved, and the manufacturers that are approving it, there's actually a record that this style has happened, which supports the warranty. They're part of the decision-making process, so there's no ambiguity on the backside that, this warranty is not valid because X, Y, Z. They're part of the decision-making process. So those questions come up early.
Okay. So it sounds like what it does, it kind of enables you to make better product decisions up front, and also gives you a little better paper trail on the back end.
By default, there's a trail also.
Makes sense. All right, so that's the risk management system. And again, if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. The ROI recap. So let's kind of go back to the numbers that we had asked you to estimate previously, the cost of installation and subsequent failure. And we'll kind of plug in some numbers here, and you'll want to plug in your own numbers. So definitely keep in mind that this is for a failure scenario, and every situation is going to be a little bit different. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them. But yeah, you'll be able to plug in kind of your own costs here. So the numbers in red that you see are avoidable costs for this scenario. And we're talking about a 25,000 square foot location. And we've calculated the total cost per square foot so that you can a little more easily plug into your size. And you'll see that in white, we've got the original installation, and we've got slab mitigation, total of $175,000. Now, if in this example, this is a failure example, so the figures in red are the costs that could have been avoided with a pre-testing program. Now, the reason, again, that you'll be able to avoid that is simply that you'll be able to make better product decisions up front. And again, you got to keep in mind some of these hidden costs that are not always considered, things like lost sales, lost management time, and then the removal and moving of fixtures and merchandise. So it's not just the reinstallation cost. You're dealing with a lot of moving parts here when you have a failure.
If I can comment on that, Joe, this scenario for a failure where it's slab mitigation at $4, again, we've seen numbers, range below that and considerably above that. The problem or the condition is identified thoroughly on the front side. The possibility of a slab requiring mitigation is not always necessary. You can go to an alternate approach with perhaps one of the high-performance adhesives, and that number would drop dramatically. But if there's a failure, what we have seen that even though the slab may have not been to the point that it absolutely needed a sealer, it's going to get one at that point. Mm-hmm. So it does drive the cost in that respect.
Makes a lot of sense. And, like you said, in some instances, you're going to have to seal. And in this example, we're saying, you're going to end up having to mitigate. But if you had reliable information on the front end, that's a decision that you could have made to save yourself a lot of money.
That is correct. This is what we see.
Right. And so in this instance, it would have been a little over $160,000. And, again, that's just one location. And, we don't want to kind of use any funny math here. These are all numbers that we have kind of consistently seen come back through different projects.
But everybody should use, of course, their own numbers.
Exactly.
To get this out.
Exactly right. So, we encourage you to plug in your numbers and kind of see what it would be in your instance. I see a couple more questions coming in here from L Hightower and Fane at suncountryfloors.com. I appreciate those guys. We'll handle those at the end. And so let's do a quick recap of the three problems that we discussed. So the first problem is just the lack of reliable information to make the right decision. We've been kind of harping on that the whole time, and that's really what leads to the second two problems. So what IFTI has kind of found is a good solution is just, again, making sure that all locations are getting consistent, reliable testing, and it's got to fit within your project schedule. And then that's going to allow you to make fiscally responsible product decisions and save yourself a lot of stress and money. The second problem, direct failures and the costs associated with that. And again, the kind of solution that we've found that works is just by basing your product decisions on valid information. Again, it's keep coming back to the same things, but it's not rocket science. You're going to drastically reduce your risk by doing that, and you're also going to make sure that your product is fully warranted if you have results that are certified and verifiable in the future. The third problem that we talked about was the overuse of moisture sealers. And again, what we found there is just that testing before installation is going to give you a good indication of if a sealer is truly needed. In a lot of cases, as Lee's been talking about, you may not need the sealer, and advanced adhesive might be more than adequate in order to both ensure that the product's performance is going to be there and that you're still under warranty.
going back to the risk management system, it's when you have the manufacturer of those products reviewing that information on the front side and signing off that it's suitable is very powerful.
And it seems unlikely that that would be the case with one of those handwritten reports that we saw earlier, right?
It doesn't give them much to go on.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories we hear out there is that, given what I'm saying here, I can't take that risk to utilize my product. I just don't have enough information.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So that pretty much wraps up the problem and solution portion of our talk. And we do have a few questions down here that we'd like to address. The first one, Lee, this is something that I think you'll find interesting. What is geography? How does that factor in? Like high humidity location, testing in Florida, things like that. What kind of role does that play?
It does have. It's reported that it does have a factor. Florida, or let's say Hawaii, high humid environments will have will be a different condition than perhaps the drier desert environments. Now, what we have found is, given the way moisture moves in a vapor form, the drier environments, let's say the southwest, can have more severe issues than very wet and rainy environments like, let's say, Seattle.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it just, again, it has to do with the science about how moisture moves in a vapor form.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's just too many variables.
There's a lot of variables, but there is a point to consider as far as geography. We found, like Florida, for instance, we've received reports that just the building standards for Florida, they seem to use more vapor retarders under the slab, and it becomes more of a code issue that's required than it is in other parts of the country, which by virtue of having a retarder required, it being used, will minimize issues. Where other areas, if they don't have that requirement, which many don't.
Makes a lot of sense. Right. That makes sense. So moving on, kind of actually a similar, on a related note, Thane asks, do you publish local statistics as far as the averages you see in a given climate? Now, that's not something that we've done in the past as far as publicly publishing our test results. But Thane, I can reach out to you and kind of see what specifically you're interested in. And yeah, I'd love to just have a chat and see what you had in mind.
We do have internal information that's not confidential in nature. That is something we can share.
Yeah. So I'll shoot you an email, Thane. And I also see that you asked a question about getting the presentation copy of the slides. And yes, absolutely. I will send that to you as well. I believe, actually, for anyone interested, my understanding is that the webinar will still be accessible for 1 year, the exact same URL. And if that does not turn out to be true, or in any other scenario, yeah, of course, I'll be happy to send this over. So moving on to more questions. Can you talk about moisture movement? This is coming from bhall at bp.org. Moisture movement horizontally in a slab as opposed to vertically toward the surface.
That's a great question. That question comes up all the time. It's actually counterintuitive. Moisture in a slab is moving in a vapor form, not typically. I'll say typically, it's not a liquid form. So it does move in a vertical fashion. It has to do with the concrete's capillary structure being vertical, and moisture, again, primarily in we'll say a vapor form, is going to move in that direction. We don't see moisture move in a lateral form to any material degree.
Sure.
And it's different if we're dealing with moisture in a liquid form, like leaks and what have you. That's a different situation.
Sure.
So this is where we can say that you can have a slab, let's say a large-scale facility that is only having a problem in one area for whatever reason, that area could be sealed, but the rest of the facility doesn't require that because of that point. It just doesn't move laterally. We don't have enough published information in the industry, and we talk about it fairly regularly during our ASTM meetings that a number of us are active committee members. We don't have enough of that published to be out there for a better understanding of that fact. But this is what occurs.
Like you said, it's a little bit unintuitive. It's just one of those things where, if it's in a vapor form, it just behaves a little differently than a liquid form, which
Definitely.
people are a little more used to. So that's a great question. And again, if that didn't clear anything up, anybody is more than welcome to send a little follow-up, and we'd love to chat.
Yeah, we'll reply.
So we have two points that are kind of related. The first one, what are your thoughts on MVER versus RH testing? And there's another.
I'm going to stop you right there.
Sure.
Let me focus on that. MVER testing, moisture vapor emission rate testing. This is a surface test. It's been around. It goes back to the 40s, and it's a test that's designed to establish how much moisture is coming off the surface of a slab, and there's a process to do that. It's an indicator. There is quite a bit of controversy in the industry that is this test really valuable, or has it been rendered irrelevant in today's world? And depending on who you talk to, you'll get different opinions. Versus the RH testing, RH relative humidity testing is a test method that's been with us for well over a decade in the U.S. There's been an ASTM test method since 2001, and I recall 2001, and it's measuring moisture within the body of the slab. So it's measuring moisture not necessarily in the same form as we'd be measuring at the surface of the slab with the moisture vapor emission. Okay? But we have two different test methods that basically are measuring two different conditions that do not correlate. And we like to say it's a little bit like if you go into the doctor and you got a problem with your shoulder, and he's going to do an examination to see if he can understand that shoulder condition. He may order a X-ray for hard tissue to understand that better, an MRI for soft tissue to understand that better, and those two do not naturally correlate. It's the same situation that we see with the MVER and RH. Mm-hmm. Lastly on this, and I try to be brief, but I'm unable to do that. That's just the fact.
You got all this knowledge.
Well, the RH testing in recent years there has been a focus on, that's the test to use. That's the one that should be able to give us the information we need to make decisions. And we have found from the studies that we've done internally, the studies we've done being committee members of ASTM, that as we stand here today, that test method is still being refined. And we have just gone through a study, was it 2 months ago or so in Chicago? And we have an ASTM meeting coming up in 2 weeks here in I believe it's Clearwater, Florida, and we're going to present that information because there's still work to be done on that test method. It is not the end-all, be-all by any means. So we happen to be fans of using both methods. We do side-by-side testing because we feel both methods are providing valuable information. They're valuable indicators to give an overall. Okay?
Makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like kind of similarly.
And I'm sorry, Joe, I'm going to cut you off again here. We would rather see a project where we did less data points, because right now the protocols say 1 per 1,000 feet after the first 1,000. We would like to see less of that, maybe 1 per 3, 1 per 5, depending on the size of it, but collect all the information per data site. And we feel that is providing much more information. Actually, it ends up being less money to the owner also.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so it sounds like kind of similar to the question about geography, where, sure, the area humidity is a factor, but there's so many other factors that you can't really just base it on one thing. Kind of the same thing with the RH-MVER. There's so many factors that we can't be just using one test.
No, and we don't use just those two. There are other conditions that we're looking at to help paint a picture to understand what the risk condition would be of having a problem.
All righty. So let's move on to a similar question. What tests are you running, and how do you predict seasonal changes? It came in from FC D'Amico.
Well, interesting. Seasonal changes. So, again, I think we covered the test method. We, again, liked using the two most common, the calcium chloride for MVER testing, surface testing, as well as the in situ relative humidity for internal conditions. A combination of that we have found to be quite valuable. Seasonal conditions is an interesting subject. We have been on projects where the slab has been in place for many years, has a floor covering down, and we have seen those conditions from season to season, from year to year, not change much. And it doesn't necessarily mean, can be controversial, but there may not be a vapor retarder below the slab, which can affect it. But we find it's a little bit like once the glass is full and it seeks its level, it doesn't change dramatically, even with seasons. This is what we have found. Not to say it can't affect a situation, a test site. New facilities that are being built, which is problematic when the facility is not enclosed and the HVAC system is not functioning, where the environment has a balanced climate, can affect the test methods. And the MVER test, being a surface test, can be affected, I'll say this generally speaking, more so than the relative humidity. Not to say that they both have standards for climate, but that can be problematic. There's ways to deal with it, but it takes some effort, some oversight, some good, clear standards being published in specifications on what the requirement is, and it can be improved.
Mm-hmm.
It can be improved.
That makes a lot of sense. And, one of the other things, again, going back to just, collecting data, making sure that it's turned into reliable information. At this point, we have such a large body of test data that, seasonal changes, we have the information for the environmental conditions, slab conditions, things like that, and we can start to even go back and compare to similar scenarios, which is a really valuable tool.
That's a great point, and we do that. There are certain customers that do like to have that type of information that we provided to them. And when it's not proprietary information, it's something we can share, with the industry. We do that also.
Okay. Another good question here. Many installations are on new construction and require testing before the HVAC is operational.
Yeah.
How do you address these projects?
That goes back to that same point. That is problematic. That's problematic for any testing. If the facility is not enclosed and acclimated within a reasonable range of how it's going to be used, moisture just doesn't have a tendency to move. So it's really in equilibrium with its outside environment. So if that's the case, it's not compelled to move, you will typically get low values, but not because there's not a problematic condition. It's just because the environment is not suitable for testing. And when the facility then is closed and the climate condition is suitable, by then, in many cases, the floor is already installed, and there can be a problem. And then a forensic study is done, and we see these dramatic differences in test values. Well, most of the time it can be explained because testing was not done in the proper environment, so your indication was not providing you what you needed. Again, it can be controlled. It does take due diligence and effort to do that.
Mm-hmm. And then it's not so. My understanding is that if the building is not in operating conditions, then any in-house test that would be performed technically wouldn't be up to ASTM standards anyway.
Well, there can be. There's a range that is provided in the protocol for testing that if the climate system is not running, but it's within a certain range, temperature and humidity, it's deemed reasonable or acceptable as far as that goes. There are situations that we find throughout the country where certain times of the year they happen to get lucky because the ambient conditions, exterior ambient conditions happen to be close to the range, even though this facility may not be in the best case. So it has to be looked at by a very informed individual to be able to make a call that is this test data or ideally information reliable.
Sure.
It starts there. Reliable information is the cornerstone for reducing the risk of floor covering or coating problems and reducing the risk of having to spend more than you need to correct a perceived problem.
And then we got one more question here. Might be something that we kind of touched on, but let's go through one more time just to make sure. Can you explain the differences between the normal test and the calcium chloride test? I'm having to do both on an existing building with moisture problems.
So the normal test probably is referring to the relative humidity test.
Okay.
Because again, that has, there's been efforts in the industry to use that as to normalize it, if you will. And again, many of the experts that we associate with throughout the industry through committees and all are cautious of utilizing any one test. And even though they all have their flaws, we're finding the relative humidity test has and does still have its flaws. It's not perfect. Good, real good. We're real happy about it. We're glad it's part of the process here. But it's not perfect. The surface calcium chloride that's been around again for many years, it has its flaws too. Meaning that things have to be done right for it to be able to provide information that can be valuable.
It sounds like the main value is you're getting some data on what moisture is coming out of the surface of the floor, which, after all, that's where the adhesive meets the concrete.
That's a good point.
And the RH gives you then, on the other hand, a little bit of in-depth.
Right. It can be a predictor of future issues. This becomes a topic that can take some time because there's plenty of nuances around that. But again, we like to use those two particular test methods with the other analysis that we do and other inspection activities we do to paint a picture that portrays what the risk level is of that particular facility. That's what we're trying to get to. Not just the numbers game. We want to use enough of this information to understand what's happening and then make decisions. And the same thing that the manufacturers of adhesives and mitigation systems, they're using that same information to determine, this is something that we can employ on this particular project and feel confident about and provide a warranty or not. One thing we didn't touch on, and we didn't cut on time, is even the mitigation system is effective as they are today, which we think that the chemical companies have done a heck of a job over the years. And this is now solvable. It doesn't solve every issue. There are slabs that have reactive materials in it that those products will actually make worse. And there's new standards that we're seeing come out from these manufacturers saying we better be looking for this too. Right? And it's an evolution. It's an evolutionary process here that we're involved in, and we're trying to do our part within the evolution to provide value.
And that's a great way to put it as far as trying to do our part. And anybody out there that has further questions, especially as far as the more scientific or the kind of reasoning why we use the test that we do, we'd love to talk about that further. That's just something that might be better talked about offline, just so that we're not boring too many people with the details. But I had another question come in here from Jay Gary. How does the surface RH test with the dome compare to the in situ in-slab RH test? Great question.
That is. That's great. And that's an interesting question. So there's another test method that we have an ASTM protocol for, and that's it's an insulated hood test that measures the relative humidity at the surface of the slab, perhaps in lieu of using the calcified MBBER testing. It's giving another indication. Now, again, this is happening at the surface of slab with an insulated hood and a probe, a reader, opposed to reading within the body of the slab. Now, it is not, the insulated hood test for surface for RH is not typically used much. We don't see that in standards very much. It hasn't really gained popularity as a test method to be used. And most of us that are in this particular area of the industry and on the ASTM committee think it has value and provides value. IFTI actually uses it more when we're doing forensic studies than we use it for doing any type of pre-installation testing. But it's, again, measuring the relative humidity, again, at the surface in lieu of within the body, and, again, giving an indication of both of those conditions.
Right. And for anybody that's not as familiar with that one, it's, as Lee said, for the in situ, of course, the probes go in the concrete, and with the dome, you're going to have just a plastic seal over the surface.
Yeah, that actually has a specific insulated hood that goes to try to hold that environment, which is actually different than the calcium chloride. So we're getting a little technical, a little granular here. Mm-hmm. That would be one I'd be happy to discuss further if there is interest. It just needs to reach out and discuss that. But that kind of keeps it at, I think, a general high level.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, no, it makes sense. There's also, I suppose, the minor benefit of it being non-invasive as well, which is something else to consider.
It can, but we know we got to break a few eggs here to make that omelet. So, but none of these are out of control as far as that goes.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jack, like Lee said, this is something that we would love to chat about further. If you want to kind of just have a little back and forth or talk about what you found, this is the kind of stuff that we're interested in. So feel free to reach out, and I'll be following up with everybody who asked questions. Just a quick email, just to make sure that you got your question answered and see if there was anything else that we could just help out with. So it seems like that is it for the questions. We're right at 59 and a half minutes, so that's pretty accurate timing. But if anyone else has any more questions, we would love for them to get sent to info@ifti.com. And Lee, what else do you have to add?
I think we're good for now. Again, as Joe mentioned, if there is further questions, please do reach out to us. We're always interested in having conversations about this subject matter. This is what we do. This is all we do. It's all we can do.
Yep. And then I see one other question came in from Nick. Can I get a copy of the slides, please? Yes, absolutely. So I did have it confirmed by our moderator that the presentation will be available in the form that you just watched it. But if you don't want to have to listen to me and Lee again, I will gladly send you the slides so you can just kind of cruise through them at your leisure.
And like a PDF form.
Exactly.
Very good, Joe.
All righty. So I really appreciate everybody tuning in today. And if there was anything else that you would be interested in hearing a similar webinar on later, some more in-depth information on, again, the technical aspects or kind of the more granular scientific stuff, we'd love to do that. So if there's interest, let us know. And anything else, Lee?
No, I think we're fine, Joe. Thank you very much. Very nice job. And we'll complete it. This is very good.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.